The Europe Smash just wrapped up and there's a lot to talk about, so let's get into it. As usual, I'm going to go through each round talking about the men's side first and then the women's side. So starting off with the round of 64, we saw one of the biggest upsets of the year. Truls Morregard, the defending champion and at the time the world number 2, went out in the first round against Dmitry Ovcharov. And nothing against Dima, but I don't think anybody remotely saw this coming. Truls has made so many major comebacks throughout his career that it felt like another one here in his home country was almost inevitable, but it definitely wasn't, and Dima won the match 3-0. And honestly, this sort of highlights what has not been a great year for Truls. I mean, he became the world number 2 this year, but he hasn't really had great performances to back that up. But honestly, with how he played in Sweden last year, it felt like he had to be a write-in for the final of this event, especially without Wang Chuqin. But instead of another great performance, we got something that sort of puts the pressure onto Truls. This year, we've seen Sora and Felix and Harimoto make their strides towards Wang Chuqin, and for being the world number 2 coming into this event, it feels like Truls is a lot further behind. And obviously there's a lot of credit to be given to Dima for how he played, but ultimately, a world number 2 should be playing like a world number 2. And despite that disappointment for the Swedish crowd, they did see Anton Schallberg take down US Smash finalist Vladimir Sidorenko. I think there's an interesting discussion to be had, not just about Sidorenko, but also about quite a few players this year. There have been plenty of players this year who have gone on really impressive breakout runs, but for most of them, they haven't really been able to follow it up at all. On the other hand, someone like Kwon Won-hong, who won against Benedict Duda here, hasn't gone very far in any of the tournaments he's played, but has picked up quality wins in each one. I think that degree of steady growth for Kwon Won-hong is probably going to end up being a very good thing for him. He won't have to go through as many ups and downs as somebody like Wen Rabo is going through right now. Another player who I think has been a little bit more consistent is Hiroto Shinizuka, but he went out in the first round against Christian Carlsen here. And going into the women's side, I think something a little bit similar is happening with Hana Goda. She was matched against Shen Jingtong in the first round, which is a tough draw, but not necessarily for her, because they have played each other before, but Hana Goda is the one who won. And it was a very close match, but towards the end it started to slip away from Hana Goda. And I talked about it in the last video, but this tournament made it even more clear Hana Goda really has a problem with closing out games. You've seen it here and against Chen Meng and against Sun Yingxia, where she has an incredible performance, but just can't close it out. And I think the fact that she's still very inconsistent against similarly or lower ranked players is definitely hurting her a lot. Because if she was able to get deeper in tournaments and face these top Chinese players more often, she would almost definitely have more wins against them. And not just that, but she would also have more experience to help her close out the end of these games. So there still is kind of a long way to go for Hana Goda, but she definitely has enough time. But one upset that actually did happen was Annette Kaufman beating Zhu Yuling. There's not really too much to say other than giving Kaufman her flowers for how well she played against one of the best players in the world. Annette Kaufman is another player who's very young but still clearly has a lot of potential to be one of the best in the world. We also saw another young player in Peng Yuhen get a great win against Prathika Pavade in the first round. And one last pretty notable upset from this round was Georgia Pikalin getting a win against Charlotte Lutz. Pikalin had already gone on a very impressive run to even qualify for the main draw, so to not only get there but also get into the round of 32 was a great result. And going into the round of 32, we kind of pick up where we left off, with Dmitry Ovcharov being in great form. He won 3-0 against the Champions Yokohama finalist Oh Jun-sung and still looked great. There was also a pretty impressive performance from Jonathan Grote to take down Lin Renru in a very close match. Honestly, it's made for a pretty disappointing past couple of months for Lin Renru, especially after he was coming off of great performances in the World Cup and the World Championships. And his Chinese Taipei teammate Kwon Won-hong got matched up against a familiar opponent in Anders Lind. They had just played each other in a very close match in Yokohama, and this one was no different. But just like in Yokohama, for as well as Kwon Won-hong played, he wasn't able to get past Anders Lind. But once again, Anders Lind is not an easy person for young players to do well against, so Kwon Won-hong definitely deserves his flowers for putting up such a great fight in both matches. We also saw Lin Shidong get a pretty decent win against Kanak Jha, who obviously isn't the greatest player in the world, but honestly at this point Lin Shidong is kind of taking anything he can get. And Lin Shidong did look very confident in this match, and you always sort of get a sense of belief when you see him playing like that. We also saw Sora that in a very close match against Feng Yixin where he was eventually able to come out on top. And once again, Sora showed that his mental game has come a long way from last year. And one last performance I really want to talk about is Elias Ranifer beating Wen Rabo in a pretty great win. Ranifer's name really started to get onto the map after he had a great performance in the qualifying rounds of the World Team Championships. So now he's able to add this win against Wen Rabo to his resume, and he's had a pretty good year. As for Wen Rabo, we've sort of seen the same thing we've been seeing for the past few months. Once again, he hasn't made it very far in any tournament, and once again he lost to a much lower ranked player. I'm sure he'll come around eventually, but it just hasn't been great lately. On the women's side, we saw another great performance from Peng Yuhan taking down Hanuka Hashimoto. It's not easy for anyone in the world to get a win against Hashimoto, so this was very impressive. Having the ability to take down the best chopper on earth while still being a junior is one of the things that really make you impressed by someone. We also saw Shen Jingtong, who seemed like she would be a major threat after how she played in Yokohama, go out in surprising fashion against Miyukahara after an admittedly great performance. A couple other notable performances were Miyu Nagasaki getting a 3-0 win against Sabina Winter, and Nina Middleham picking up a great win against Ju Chun Hui after already having a great performance in the first round against Bernadette Such. So going into the round of 16, we already saw the fall of Dmitry Ovcharov at the hands of Darko Jorgic. So he, I guess, did have a good tournament, but it ended maybe earlier than most people would have expected or hoped for. And speaking of people's hopes, we saw Lin Chidong play Alexei Lebrun again, and he lost. He played pretty well. It was a close match, but he lost. And that's been the story of Lin Chidong all year long. He is a former world number 1. He has the capacity to be great. He just hasn't been being great. I definitely still believe in Lin Chidong, but it's pretty tough these days. None of that to discredit Alexei though, because he played really well. And we also saw his brother, Felix, go against Thibaut Perret, and pretty similarly to how Felix played against Caton in Yokohama, he pretty rapidly took down Perret here. And it's a pretty good sign for Felix that he's able to be so dominant against his own teammates. A good example of that is Harimoto really struggling against Shinsuke Tagami, and they played each other here, and despite it being extremely close, Harimoto was able to just about get the win. We also saw Sora go against Shoji Hao in another match that went to a decider, but another match where Sora was able to show off his much improved mental strength. And also worth noting is Elias Ranifer beating Tomislav Pusar to make his way into the quarterfinals. Going into the women's side, we saw a match from Shin Yubin and Hina Hayata that went down to the wire, but eventually Hayata was able to get the win. This will have been kind of a disappointing result for Shin Yubin, who's been watching Miwa and Kwai Man get better and better and hasn't really been able to keep up. Chen Yi is another player who was in a pretty similar position, but ended up getting a great win against Annette Kaufman in a match that was pretty close. We also saw a very decisive win from Wang Yidi against Satsuki Odo, and Odo's struggles over the past couple of months have continued after what was a very dominant first half of the year. For as great as Satsuki Odo is, I think these past few events have sort of brought expectations back down to earth. After her win against Wang Monyu and getting so many titles in these lower tier events, I think a lot of people were ready for Satsuki Odo to be super great, but that takes time. But it does feel like we're a little ways away from her being a real threat in these types of events. Especially when she's competing against someone like Miwa Harimoto, who showed why she's so great after she came back down 9-2 in her last game against Han Ying. And also worth noting is Peng Yuhen continued her run after taking down a very informed Miyu Nagasaki. So if her wins up to this point didn't impress you enough, this definitely did. Going into the quarterfinals, we saw a great match with Sora going against Elias Ranifer. Now, one thing that got Elias this far in the event was having a difficult playstyle to adapt to, and you saw that on full display here because Sora was never really able to get into his groove. Ranifer was really battling with Sora, with every game being decided by only 2 or 3 points. Eventually, in the decider, Sora was just barely able to get a win against the Swede, and once again showed his mental growth over the past couple of months. I think one thing thing that sticks out for Sora here is that there's no prototypical game where he gives up halfway through and loses the game 11-4. He really gave it his all through every single game, and I think that's something that's super important for Sora to keep up. Obviously, from the perspective of Elias Ranifer, this will have been a great tournament and he'll be very ready to keep fighting through the rest of the year. Every other quarterfinal on the men's side was pretty dominant, with Jorgic taking down Omar Asar, Harimoto taking down Alexi 4-0, and Felix looking exceptionally in form against Hugo Calderano. On the women's side, Wang Monyu faced an obviously unexpected opponent in Peng Yuhen, but this was honestly a much better match than probably anybody expected. Wang Monyu was able to close it out in 5 games, but Peng Yuhen put up a really great fight. And I think what has made this run for Peng Yuhen so impressive is the quality of players she's beaten. Everyone she's played is so technically solid that it really takes a special level of skill to beat them. So a run like that really makes me believe that Peng Yuhen is here to stay, and this isn't just some sort of flash in the pan. We also saw a rematch of champions Yokohama with Miwa going against Chen Yi. Now in Yokohama, Miwa was down 2-0 and had to really fight her way back to win the match. But this was a completely different kind of match, and Miwa won 4-0. This was definitely a statement win, especially after winning the first game 11-1. Chen Yi has been looking to catch up with Kwai Man and Miwa, but Miwa was definitely not letting that happen here. Speaking of Kwai Man, she also had a rematch from Yokohama where she went against Hina Hayata, and unlike her performance in Yokohama, Hayata really gave Kwai Man a hard time. After being down 3-1, Hayata really started to play well and took Kwai Man to a decider where Kwai Man was just barely able to win. This was still a great performance from Hayata though, and I think you can see over the course of this year that she's played a lot more freely. She's sort of accepted her role with being aged out of the Japanese team, and is just ready to play as well as she can for as long as she can, without too much concern with where she stands in the hierarchy of her team. And it's something that's brought a lot of freedom to Hayata, and it's really elevated her throughout this year. In the last women's quarterfinal, we saw Wang Yidi get a pretty convincing win 4-0 against Shushun Yao. Going into the semifinals, we saw Darko Jorgic play against Felix Lebrun, and kind of like he has been the whole event, Felix kind of breezed through him. Felix played pretty much perfectly and sped through the match, which only lasted a little over 20 minutes. The other semifinal though was definitely a lot more dramatic. Sora Matsushima was once again matched against Tomokazu Harimoto, which was a rematch of the semifinals in Champions Yokohama just the previous week. And Sora was looking for his revenge after Tomo got a pretty convincing win in that match. And for the first 4 games, they looked pretty even and ended up bringing it to 2-all. But after that, Sora started to really gain some confidence and won the next game. And so he went into the 6th game only needing to win 1 more, and he looked very ready to do it. He came out the gate up 0-7, and it looked like Harimoto was done for. But Tomokazu Harimoto has one of the strongest mental games in the sport, and he was ready to prove that here. And so after being down 0-7, he went on an 11-1 run to win the game and bring the match to a decider. But by the 7th game, it was pretty clear that Sora lost his mental focus, and Harimoto was able to win against a very deflated Sora Matsushima. And so once again, Sora came up short in his match against Harimoto, this time in a much more devastating way. But still, I think it's harsh to criticize Sora's mental game too strongly in these matches, because in all the matches where he's had his coach, he's looked really great, but it's just when he goes against Harimoto, when he can't have his coach and he's on his own, he starts to sort of look like his old self. But Sora definitely does have the capacity to beat Harimoto, because you saw that over the last 2 years in the Japanese national championships. So it's clear that Sora's mental is getting better, but he still needs to develop before he can confidently go into all of his matches. On the women's side, Wang Monyu really looked like she was ready to announce that she was back. Considering how well Kwai Man has played recently, especially considering her matches against Sun Ying-sha, Wang Monyu picking up a win in this way is a huge statement, and it's exactly what she's needed after a very rough year. Miwa Harimoto went against Wang Yidi, which was a repeat of the Champions Yokohama semifinals, but it saw a different winner this time. Despite how well Miwa played in Yokohama and throughout this entire tournament, Wang Yidi was just able to outplay Miwa. It was honestly pretty unexpected that Wang Yidi was able to win this match when you look at how dominant Miwa really looked in their match in Yokohama. And so Miwa and Kwai Man, who were both looking more and more incredible as the year went on, weren't able to make their way into the final. I think despite how well they played, this was really a reminder to everybody that it's not easy to break through the highest tier of the Chinese national national team. For as good and in form as they are, it'll take a lot for them to be consistently winning these matches. But really, with their level of play, I think that they're ready to take on that challenge. And so going into the finals, Harimoto went against Felix, and it was once again a very fast and pretty dismissive match. Harimoto was in absolutely stellar form, but it just wasn't any match for Felix. And so just like that, Felix had secured his spot as the champion of Europe Smash. This was, I think, an incredibly important result for Felix, because you saw Harimoto's run in Yokohama where he looked absolutely dominant, you saw Sora's run in the US Smash where he looked absolutely dominant, and for Felix to really compete with them, he needed one of these runs himself. So with Wang Chuqin coming back pretty soon and Truls trying to re-establish himself in the world rankings, the next few months are going to be very interesting, especially in terms of battling for the world #1. With multiple Champions events, another Grand Smash, and multiple Continental events going on throughout the rest of the year, there's a lot of room for movement within the top 5, and everyone is going to be looking to come out on top. And in the women's final, Wang Manyu went against Wang Yidi, and despite it being a closer match than the men's final, it wasn't really too close. Wang Manyu came out on top and was finally able to win her first title of 2026. And similarly to the men's side, this event sort of evened out the players who were gaining and losing momentum over the course of this year. Kwaiman and Miwa both played like they very well could have been the second best player in the world recently, but they were both shut down here, and Wang Manyu really was able to remind everyone who she is. And with Shen Jingtong and Wang Yidi both getting their own respective wins against Kwaiman and Miwa, they also proved that they deserve to be in the conversations of everyone battling to be the second best in the world. Even though Sun Ying-sha is very concretely at the top, the world #2 is still looking like it'll be a real battle. And given the way these past few events have gone, it's really up to Shin Yubin, Satsuki Odo, and Chen Yi to re-establish themselves as the threats that we all thought that they were, because the previous reputation they've built for themselves has been slipping away more and more these past couple of months. But yeah, that's everything I wanted to talk about in the Europe Smash this year. Make sure to let me know your thoughts on the event, and yeah, that's all I've got, so thank you.